Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you didn't know, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, but before I say the things I'm going to say in this video, keep in mind that I am not a licensed professional, so with that out of the way, I wanted to talk about anger. Because it's about time. A lot of these videos that I, make express a lot of like misanthropy and pessimism, so why don't I just address anger at its core? Now, before I say the things that I'm going to say about anger, I am still going to put it at the forefront that despite being a pessimistic person, I am not necessarily the most emotionally intelligent kind of human being that you could come across. And even with that being said, I plan to make a video specifically about being an INTP and what exactly makes an INTP emotional. So look forward to that video if that's your thing. But for now, under the context of my narcissistic personality disorder, I wanted to talk about anger. Here's the thing. I know I say that I don't really have like a complete sense of self. My idea of like who I am is very shattered and, fragmented, and I'm desperately trying to pick up the pieces every single second that I exist, because having a cluster B personality disorder, a lot of it is basically just having an identity crisis and coping in a various amount of ways. But basically, I have a bone to pick with our attitude towards anger, because if I spend a lot of time in pessimism and frustration, to a certain extent, very certain extent, I might have more of slightly above higher wisdom when it comes to actually talking about anger. And perhaps in a way, this video could display better emotional intelligence, because I guess if I'm trying to make sense of my identity and my worldviews and basically everything that makes me me in a sense, I kind of wanted to defend anger, because everybody tells you, especially as a guy, that, oh, you need to get more in touch with your emotions, you shouldn't pretend that they exist, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. I do have a lot of problems with emotional regulation and just having a content sense of self. So when I hear a lot of people talk about like anger, the irony is that I've always thought that people treated the notion of anger, very unfairly. Now, I understand where this might cross the line. A lot of anger has obviously, resulted in getting people, let's say murdered, or putting those people who do that, in prison. So when I talk about like trying to like justify anger in a sense, I know a lot of people are going to be like up in arms in terms of like, oh, but anger can be, extremely detrimental and whatnot. I'm not trying to deny that, but the only thing that I'm curious about is how come when it comes to like almost like any other emotion, it's treated with, a better sense of fairness that you would come across when it comes to, anger. Because a lot of people say, oh, you should feel sadness. Oh, you should find what makes you happy, what makes you want to like get out of like bed every single day. But a lot of people talk about anger as something that needs to be like either suppressed, like it doesn't exist, or like, oh, just like keep it to yourself because, oh, it ruins the vibe, or oh, it makes you not enjoy life as much. And that's true. I can, firmly confirm that anger definitely makes it a lot more difficult to enjoy life. I have over a billion things, over an infinite amount of things that I can complain about, and it all contributes to, having, anger in my personality profile in this sense, I guess. But I think a lot of people, I think the thing about anger is that it demonstrates that a lot of people are not actually as emotionally intelligent as themselves as they qualify. And that's coming from a person that openly admits that I am not necessarily the most like emotionally intelligent either, despite being, such a pessimistic person. I'm an INTP, for Christ's sake. So if you can fill in the connotations of that, then like, yeah, go ahead. Not to rely too much, on like stereotypes, quote unquote, because yes, kind of like what I said earlier in this video, I do want to make a video about what I think makes an INTP emotional, at least, in my case and, in my experiences. But back to the topic of like anger though, every single time you talk about like anger, people always talk about like the ways in which you need to, better control it, because like, oh, worst comes to worst with anger, you might end up hurting somebody, you might end up like, reaching out for like revenge, or let's say punching holes in the wall, whatever, like, all this kind of stuff that doesn't really like help you in like any sort of way. But like, I get that. I'm not necessarily, like trying to deny that, but it's as hypocritical to me when people talk as if like, oh, anger is just like so taboo, when they tell men especially, oh, it's okay to feel sad, or they try to do like their like performance activism and say like, oh, it shouldn't be frowned upon that a guy cries, or express more like like deeply held like feelings instead of just being like stoic and robotic all the time. But oh no, anger is quote unquote like too scary. Or you'll hear a lot of people say that yeah, like they'll talk about anger as if like it's not even real. Like anger is hiding like sadness. Like if sadness can be real, why can't anger be real as well? Like if all emotions exist on this like spectrum that sort of like connect with each other, anger is definitely the one that's like held within taboo. And all the work when it comes to anger comes to like oh yeah, again, suppressing it or finding better ways to like deal with it. And I don't know, I think having this much anger all the time, I am actually stronger than a lot of people I know, despite not basically having like the best quality of life. If you exist in this like NPD form of living, you can just watch enough of my videos to it's not going to be hard to like connect that I am pretty much a very like pessimistic and sort of like unhappy sort of like person. But when you talk about feelings of like anger, people often get scared. But I think that reveals a certain amount of truth that like, yes, people just suppress their anger rather than like actually confronting it. And I think like maybe they're right. Maybe there actually is no cure to anger in a sense that can actually like help you. So that's why people just say, oh, channel it into like other stuff, write poetry, create like some kind of like art, and they don't want to entertain the notion. And I think the reason people still fight and engage in like violence is because like at the end of it, we are still animals. So I'm not going to talk about like anybody sort of like specific, but it's like, for example, like people would like raise their eyes if you say like, oh, I have violent thoughts. I've thought about what it would be like to physically hurt somebody that I really don't like, or maybe having thoughts like the whole world would be better if this kind of person did not particularly exist. Like if you just say that, it might like raise a lot of like red flags to like a lot of people. And sure, that might be understandable to like a certain extent, but it's like, where do you reach the emotional intelligence where you can kind of say that like, yes, I am actually very much comfortable with recognizing my angry thoughts? And I would just like to turn the tables on like other people. If you don't want to confront your thoughts of like anger, rage, and like destruction, maybe you're truly the one who can't like handle like your own anger, quote unquote, and yet you mask and say that like, oh, people should be more emotionally intelligent, like this or that. Like if I've thought so many times about like hurting people and I've never actually done it because like, oh look, obviously I'm right here, I'm not behind bars for like killing somebody or anything like that, then I would actually argue that I handle angry thoughts way better than you do. And people look at anger as if it's just like this emotion that's putting you down. And yes, that is true. It is just an emotion that essentially just like puts you down. But I think like the wisdom in anger is that there are things that you wouldn't stand for. Like just the notion that like you might think these like really aggressive and like violent thoughts, like these thoughts of like, oh, you want to like hurt somebody, like the symbolism of it, because a lot of times when people talk about emotions, it's so like abstract and like symbolic. So like if I'm dabbing a little bit like into that, I see these like desires full of like rage, and I don't do them. Maybe you get scared when you think of those things and you don't want to like admit it to yourself, because if you were to like tap into those thoughts a little bit, you might just be the person that you're criticizing. You might just be the next person like in the news that did this shooting, that did this or did that, or like whatever. So why aren't we allowed to confront anger in the same way as like other emotions? Like I know people always like to talk about like, oh, like warning signs that like we should have seen and whatnot. But it's like, if we really wanted people to like I guess like channel their emotions in like a more like healthy, like positive way, then I don't think we should be like neglecting anger to like the extent that like we do. I think you should own up to those thoughts that you wouldn't necessarily like act upon. like those thoughts of like, let's say being in road rage and like wanting to get out of the car and like beat up the obnoxious person that's causing all these problems in the road for like everybody else. You think about it, but you wouldn't, like actually do it. And you wouldn't admit to other people that like you think about those things, but it's like if your emotions tell you something just as much as like all those other emotions, then anger is a fighting spirit in a sense. It's a charged up, sort of like energy where you demand, at least in theory, that the world should function in this like proper way, and those who can't get in line should, be dealt with in some form. And sure, once you reach that point, maybe you should do it. Well, obviously you should do it in like a better way that doesn't, come completely to like bite you in the ass or something. But the thought process that like leads you there, people act like, oh, that's such a like terrible thing. Oh, that's like, oh, it shouldn't be there. But honestly, you're just as neglectful of an emotion then as the people that you claim, oh, don't have like proper emotional like intelligence, enough. So it's just like, why can't anger be real? Why does it have to be, like a shield that, is covering like actually like true like hidden emotions? So it's like why is there a hierarchy within emotions if like ideally you should be able to learn something about like each and every single emotion? And I guess the hypocrisy here is that like I am vouching for anger just like a bit more, so perhaps there is a hierarchy in all of our emotions, and anger is just unfortunately going to be the one that's always at like the very bottom. But like it's just food for thought to like say though, is that like if you're going to be honest, then just say all emotions are valid except for anger. But ironically, I'm not, I'm gonna admit to like my like predispositions. Low-key, I think anger is the only like sort of like valid emotions, because I think all those other emotions, in a way, because I've spent too much time in anger, so perhaps this is like a bias from an anger mindset, is that like you suppress your true emotions all the time by refusing to allow yourself to be angry in the way that you want, because society, is not gonna accept it. So you have to sound more pseudo-intellectual with the other emotions, like, oh, deep down, I know it's just a sense of sadness. I know it's just like a whatever, but like, why can't it both be true? Why can't the anger and sadness be true? Why can't you feel defeated but still have this like symbolically like fighting spirit to like, want to do something about it? Because a lot of people use the narrative of anger to make you feel bad about yourself. But then, they'll say, oh my gosh, men act like they're not emotional, but like anger is still an emotion. So if you're saying that, then anger is just as much of an emotion as every single other emotion. So I don't know. I don't think I have to hide something just to feel like, like I'm, angry. And your anger is just as real as your sadness, is just as real as like, all that like other stuff. And I think it's a testament to true self-control that if you think these angry thoughts and you're not afraid to like face them and you don't like act upon them, you're actually like in better self-control and better discipline than the person who claims that, oh, anger is just a cover-up for something, anger doesn't exist, or anger is almost like, like the forbidden emotion because it can like lead to chaos. If you want to go that route, then why can't we just say that about like all emotions? So I don't know. There's just hypocrisy there, or whatever. I'm probably going on in like a loop at this point, but yeah, that's just what I wanted to share.